The banging came first. Not one sound, but several. Sharp, violent. Close enough to rattle the quiet of the neighborhood. For a split second, it didn't make sense. Fireworks? A car backfiring? Then someone whispered what nobody wanted to say out loud. Gunshots. By the time neighbors looked outside, the street was already filling with flashing lights. Police cars, one after another, cutting through the calm of a gated Coral Springs community. Officers moved fast, weapons drawn, voices tight, controlled. Something had already happened. Something irreversible. Inside that home on the second floor, behind closed doors, lay a woman whose life had been moving in only one direction, forward. Nancy Bowen was 38 years old, vice mayor of Coral Springs, Florida, a rising political figure. And by the time the sun fully came up on April 1st, 2026, she was gone. The call that brought police to the house wasn't dramatic. It wasn't urgent in the way emergencies usually are. It was a wellness check. Nancy had missed a city commission meeting. That alone was unusual. She was known for showing up, for everything. Meetings, events, community gatherings. If something mattered to the people, it mattered to her. So when she didn't appear, people noticed. Texts were sent, calls were made. No response. At some point, concern turned into action. Officers were dispatched to her home on Northwest 127th Avenue. What they found inside would quickly shift the story from concern to horror. Nancy's body was discovered in the master bedroom, wrapped, hidden, placed on the bed as if someone had tried to delay the inevitable moment of discovery. She had been shot 3 times. And the man who lived in that house with her, the man who had stood beside her in photos in public, in what looked like a shared life, was nowhere to be found. Hours later, about a dozen miles away in Plantation, that man would be surrounded. Cell phone footage captured the scene. Police vehicles boxing in an apartment complex, officers stepping out with weapons ready, commands echoing through the air. Stephen Bowen, Nancy's husband, was taken into custody. 40 years old. A nonprofit executive. A man who, until that moment, had existed in the background of a much larger story. His wife's. Now he was at the center of it. To understand what was lost, you have to step back from that morning and look at who Nancy was before it. Because she was never just a headline. She was the daughter of Haitian immigrants, Lynn and Marlee Mateer, who built a life in South Florida and raised their children with a clear sense of purpose. Education mattered. Service mattered. Community mattered. Nancy carried that with her everywhere she went. She attended Florida A&M University, then went on to earn a master's degree in environmental health sciences from Johns Hopkins. Long before politics, she was already moving through spaces that shaped policy and influence, interning with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, working in the office of a U.S. Senator, even stepping into the Obama White House as an intern. She could have stayed in those rooms. Instead, she came back home, back to Broward County, back to the communities that raised her. She worked on environmental programs, organized relief efforts for Haiti, engaged with local residents on issues most people overlooked: water quality, conservation, infrastructure, the details that rarely make headlines but quietly shape daily life. In 2017, she ran for a position most people couldn't even explain: the Broward County Soil and Water Conservation District. And she won. 3 years later, she aimed higher. In 2020, Nancy ran for the Coral Springs City Commission, a city of over 130,000 people. No one like her had ever held that seat before. She won that too, becoming the first Black and Haitian American woman elected in the city's history. By 2024, when her seat was up again, something even more telling happened. No one challenged her. Not one opponent stepped forward. That kind of uncontested re-election doesn't happen by accident. It happens when a community sees you, trusts you, and believes you belong exactly where you are. But Nancy wasn't finished. In the weeks leading up to April 1st, she had begun quietly sharing something with people close to her. She was ready for the next step: Congress. The announcement was scheduled for April 2nd, 2026. She had plans. Momentum. A trajectory that was about to expand far beyond Coral Springs. And through all of it, there was someone who had been there, watching it unfold in real time. Her husband. From the outside, their life looked stable, even happy. Photos told a familiar story. Smiling faces, formal events, vacations, celebrations. In one anniversary post, Nancy shared a picture of the two of them standing in front of the Coral Springs City Hall seal, a symbol of everything she had built. 3 years of building, dreaming, and loving each other through everything, she wrote. It read like certainty, like partnership, like a future that made sense. But public images don't always reflect private realities. Stephen Bowen worked as the chief operating officer of a religious nonprofit. His work was community-based, faith-centered, respectable, grounded. Yet, according to people close to Nancy, something beneath the surface had been shifting. There were tensions, quiet ones, the kind that don't always make it outside the walls of a home. As Nancy's profile grew, so did the distance between where she was going and where he stood. She was in rooms with political leaders, organizing statewide campaigns, preparing for a congressional run. He was watching. Some believe that difference became too heavy, too visible, too constant. No official motive has been confirmed by law enforcement. But one statement, allegedly made by Stephen himself, would echo louder than any speculation. I couldn't take it anymore. Investigators say that after the shooting, Stephen didn't immediately flee. He stayed in the house, overnight, while Nancy's body remained upstairs. At some point, he left. He drove to a relative's home in Lauderdale Lakes, carrying a rifle. There, according to reports, he made a confession, telling his uncle what he had done. That uncle went to the police, and the sequence of events that began with a quiet wellness check quickly unraveled into an arrest for first-degree premeditated murder. In court, Stephen Bowen stood before a judge, facing charges that would define the rest of his life. No bond, 2 counts, premeditated murder, and tampering with physical evidence. The details laid out were stark, clinical, final. But outside that courtroom, the impact was anything but. In Coral Springs, the loss didn't feel procedural. It felt personal. Colleagues struggled to speak, not because they didn't have words, but because none of them felt sufficient. Commissioner Joshua Simmons described her as more than a colleague. A battle buddy, he said. Someone who showed up, someone who cared, someone who kept going, even when things were difficult. Others echoed the same sentiment. Nancy was present, engaged, tireless. She wasn't just part of the system, she was actively trying to improve it. Even in her personal life, she carried weight most people never saw. Just months earlier, she had lost her younger brother Donovan, a tragedy that deeply affected her family. And still, she kept moving forward. Still, she showed up. Now, the room she once walked into so easily felt different without her, quieter, incomplete. Her family described her not as a politician, but as something far more intimate. A sister, a daughter, a friend whose presence filled every space she entered. A light. And in the aftermath, that word kept coming back. Light. Because that's what people felt was gone. There's a tendency in cases like this to search for a single explanation, a clean answer, something that makes it all make sense. But reality rarely works that way. What remains instead are fragments, a life built over decades, a future that was days away from expanding, a relationship that from the outside looked whole, and a moment, sudden, violent, irreversible, that brought everything to an end. By the time the police lights faded and the streets went quiet again, the story had already traveled far beyond Coral Springs. But inside that community, the loss stayed close. Not as headlines, not as speculation, but as absence. The kind you feel in meetings where a chair remains empty, in events where a voice is missing. In a city that, for the first time in a long time, had to move forward without someone who had spent her life trying to move it forward with her. And just like that, April 2nd, the day she was supposed to announce her next chapter, arrived without her. The future she had been preparing for didn't disappear slowly. It stopped. The night before.